Welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson. Well, we got a lineup today of all kinds of great guests and important information to cover. Coming up in just a few moments, Jordan Sekulow is going to be with us. That's Jay's son. Jordan is the Executive Director of American Center for Law and Justice, and he has been tracking Pastor Saeed Abedini's plight in Iran, had a little bit of a brain freeze there. Anyways, you know that Pastor Abedini's been now in prison there for over 18 months. And so, in spite of all of the negotiations that we have had with Iran over the last over the last several years concerning some kind of an agreement there, nothing has been discussed about whether or not Pastor Abedini would be released or not. So we are very concerned about that and what is now the plight of him and what can happen in order to get him out. Also, Jay Sekulow, which is Jordan's dad, has been front and center on these hearings as it relates to the IRS scandal, representing a large number of the groups that have been selected by the IRS for, quite frankly, harassment. So we'll be talking to him about that also coming up in just a little bit. A little bit later on this morning also we'll be talking to Dr. Patrick Gillette. Dr. Patrick Gillette is with us today, and he'll be talking about, he's part of the series of speakers that deal with choosing options and honoring options, okay? So we'll be talking to him about that, and it's in particular how to deal with people as it relates to Alzheimer's. But first, let's check in with Jordan, and I think we got him. There he is. Hi, Jordan. How you doing, my friend?
I'm good.
You're busy.
Yeah, we're getting a new setup here. If you could maybe tell for people, it's a little bit different than the office setup that we've usually had, but still in Washington, D.C.
Okay, that'll boy. Hey, thanks for all what you guys do. You guys are terrific. Nice to have you. Tell us what's happening with Pastor Abedini.
Sure. Well, we're over 500 days Pastor Saeed's been in prison, but we have had a new move by the White House and President Obama. People may have seen last week, though, it was for us a pretty unbelievable moment because it's been so difficult. I think for some people, it's what they expect the president to do, and certainly we believe that as well. But people that have been involved in the efforts to help save Saeed know that we have been involved for over a year. And hundreds of thousands of people have spoken out. We've talked about it a number of times. It's taken a lot of people to get the President of the United States to not just talk about imprisoned Americans in Iran, but to specifically bring up Saeed Abedini. And he talked about returning him home to his wife and children in Idaho. I'm very specific, called him Pastor Saeed twice, and said he was in prison because of his Christian faith. And so this coming from the President of the United States, when we have been told time and time again by our State Department that they don't want to endanger the nuclear talks by making Saeed a pawn in those talks, well, the President of the United States speaking out kind of overrides everything that they have been concerned about. And I'm thankful and grateful that finally the right message got to the President and he spoke out.
Do you think anything will come of it?
It's interesting. This follows about 2 weeks ago, the Iranian foreign minister saying in an interview with CNN, when he was asked about Saeed and the other imprisoned Americans, he brought up the idea of clemency. And so no one had pushed that on him. It was not something the reporter was talking about, like, hey, do you have clemency? The Iranian foreign minister did that. And so with his comments, and then taking the president's comments, and I'll add another piece of news that people may not know yet. The judge that sentenced Saeed and convicted Saeed and his whole court, Branch 36 of the Iranian Revolutionary Court, the judge was moved down to civil court, so he was demoted, and his entire court was disbanded. So wow. You have a talk of clemency from the Iranian foreign minister for the first time. Then you have the judge basically thrown out and dismissed from his position, and the court disbanded. And then you have the President of the United States, who all of a sudden his advisors could no longer convince him that it would be too risky for the nuclear talks to bring up Saeed.
That's amazing. So do we know his current condition?
We do. I mean, Saeed still gets somewhat regular weekly, very quick visits with his family, but that becomes tougher and tougher when he was moved to a different prison that's further outside Tehran. But we know he has seen doctors in this, and they've given him pain medication, but he's still received no medical treatment. So a number of doctors have recommended surgery. His family's trying to get the paperwork signed so that he can get that surgery, though they suspect that, they use the bureaucracy against people there. So he's been told you have serious problems, is not getting treatment for those. He is getting pain medicine, which is something. But, he's still at a point, I don't like saying this, but just so people know the seriousness, because we have been talking about it a long time, he's still coughing up blood. So, he's still got real internal bleeding. Life is still in danger in a prison like this, as in any international prison in a developing world or third world country where you are a minority within a minority. So again, always risky, always dangerous every day. We have to get through and hope that we don't get bad news. But this is people praying, people signing up, raising their voice about Saeed. That's the way we got to the President of the United States. It took a long time, but it did happen.
It's encouraging to see some movement there. For those who don't know, Jordan, why was he in prison?
He is in prison, as President Obama said, only because of his Christian faith. He was formally charged with, it was interesting because it was nothing new, with violating the laws against illegal gatherings by being a Christian, by being part of Christian gatherings back in 2000 to 2005. So again, he wasn't charged then with that crime, and the actual major crime he was charged with, that was the action. The crime was being a threat to national security. And attempting to undermine the national security of the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran by doing work with those house churches in 2000 to 2005, something he was never charged with or arrested for at that time period.
So what can we do to help ACLJ to get his freedom?
Sure. We still have a major effort at BeHeardProject.com, our standalone website just for the persecuted, and specifically, Saeed as an American, he's still in the focus right there. And we're talking the idea of clemency. We're explaining it to people. We're seizing on that moment that when Iran brought up that idea, and now, of course, President Obama speaking out. When the President of the United States, like his politics or not, he's a leader of the free world, and he's our commander-in-chief. He also, when he speaks, people listen. And, we really needed to affect our bureaucracy that was stalling a lot of the work they could be doing. I think that will be done now. But again, people can go to BeHeardProject.com. All the information's there.
All right. Let me encourage you to do that and support what Jordan and his father are involved in. Well, so I got you a little bit here. Are these scandals going away in Washington? Do you see a resurgence of Benghazi and IRS continuing?
Well, I think the IRS one, the Congress, what's interesting there is that, Perry, they keep unturning new information. I mean, last week, actually, when I got the news that President Obama made the comments about Saeed, I was at the Government Oversight and Reform Committee room before my dad testified on the IRS issue. Right. And I was with a number of members of Congress who have been very helpful with Saeed. And I had testified before them on that. And we all got the news around the same time. And so it was an interesting situation because, again, all of us are fair to the sense that, when the president deserves praise and when we're grateful, we think he's done the right thing, we're going to say that. We're not afraid to do that because of partisan politics. At the same time, at this hearing, what was unbelievable was the change in the tone from the other party, the Democratic Party. They basically have tried to mock the entire hearing, even with new information. For instance, there's talk about new rules that will affect C4s, and these were proposed. We were supposed to believe, this is what the president was telling Bill O'Reilly in those interviews, that they were proposed because of the trouble the IRS got itself into with conservatives, and even though the conservative groups were opposed to these rules. What we've now found out, and we found out last week, was that these rules were being written by Lois Lerner during the targeting of the Tea Party and conservative groups in 2012, and that they were put forward by the former acting commissioner of the IRS, Danny Werfel, not in response to anything, but as part of a planned program that she was working on offline. That's what the email said, so it wasn't in the record. Wow. And these were Lois Lerner's rules to stop these groups. And yet this still is not resonating. So we're at a point where I think if there's no special prosecutor here, it's going to be very difficult to get to the next level of the truth. As we've seen from Eric Holder, the Attorney General of the United States, he's not taking this seriously.
No wonder she pleaded the Fifth.
Well, yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, it's not hard to figure out why Lois Lerner, this offline, and these are in emails, government emails. I heard you were working on these new rules off book, off record. And so she was doing that. I mean, she was heavily involved. And I don't understand, if it is her, Perry, and we're talking about mostly IRS officials, which is how Jay Carney, the White House spokesperson, tried to make right the president's comments that there's not a smidgen of corruption. And he said, well, the president meant outside the IRS. If that's true, why not let the investigation see through and get these bad IRS actors and make sure the message is sent that if you do this, you could get prosecuted. You could get in real trouble. Because with all the information the IRS has about all of us, whether it's also our healthcare info now through the Affordable Care Act and, of course, this all of our economic info, we need to make sure, like the IRS or not, and I don't think many of us like the IRS, that the IRS is not out with people who think they can use this for political vengeance.
Wow. Jordan, let me take a quick break. We'll come back. I got some more questions there. Jordan Sekelo is with us today with ACLJ, and let me encourage you to check out their website, support what they do, and we'll be back with Jordan in just a moment.
Hi, I'm Paulina, and I work at theDove TV. Did you know that when you support theDove TV, you have a profound impact, not only in our community, but around the world? It's your continued support that takes the inspiration and hope in the programs we produce and makes them available to the thousands of people who are watching these videos online every week. Help bring encouragement and hope to our valley and beyond by making a secure online donation today at our website, thedove.us.
Okay, we're back with Jordan Sekelo. He's the executive director of ACLJ, and you probably have seen him all over the networks, but he's made it big time. He's on here on theDove this morning, and we're delighted to have him. Jordan, I want to come back to the IRS issue. There's talk about immunity for Lois Lerner. Could that work?
I think if Congress believed that she could testify and that she was willing to testify to the extent of her knowledge, that they would grant her immunity. The problem has been, we've had plenty of time here. We're 8 months into this investigation, 9 months into the scandal, and her starting this entire scandal. And it was her, remember, who did this. And we also know, I want to point out, Perry, the former acting commissioner at the IRS, who was there, and people may have remember seeing him testify in glasses and kind of curly hair, Stephen Miller,
right,
who was there during the targeting, the predominant amount of the target, and when the scandal broke. He not on television, but in testimony to House investigators, it also came out last week. He said, listen, was there anything wrong with the 501c4 rules? No. He said, no, there was no problem, but we were getting pressure from senators. Who was it? Democrat Senator Carl Levin. So he tried to blame it on pressure from Democrats and said that's why they did this. And he was the one who worked with Lois Lerner on how to announce that the IRS had done this and to apologize for it. So if she was willing to give the information that the House investigators think would actually lead to this investigation getting to some, I guess, to the finality of who was the top, who was the most involved person. Was it Lois Lerner or not? I think that they would. But if it is Lois Lerner, she's not going to agree to testify to that. That would be totally incriminating herself if she is. And it would not be outside of the realm to believe that, Perry, she was the top, because she's been someone who has had a long history of going after conservatives, even before she was at the IRS.
Yeah, you would have to assume, being an administrative loyalist, she probably, even if she was given immunity, she'd get tied up to where she'd have to say it at all. And by this time, you're past all the election cycles. So why isn't Speaker Boehner going for special prosecutor?
It's still tough, because guess who gets to appoint the special prosecutor? The Attorney General. And so, we have seen time and again. Remember, Eric Holder was held in contempt. And the Department of Justice decided, no, we're not going to, of course, they're not going to proceed. That was a situation very similar. So, I think that is why Congress has held on to this as long as they can. And that has to be clear to people. Once they do move to the special prosecutor, if a special prosecutor is appointed, they're done. You're not going to see public testimony before Congress, no more bombshells, not a lot of public information. So, that's always been a concern, is that this Department of Justice, remember, one of the other big parts of this, newer parts of this scandal, is that the lead attorney at Department of Justice on the criminal investigation happens to be a top Obama donor. And, we're still in a process now where we wanted our clients to work with the FBI to tell them, what they knew to help the investigation. But they're involved in a civil suit, and sitting down with a FBI or Department of Justice lawyer who is totally against you and is very involved in partisan politics, you can see why we're still in the process of reevaluating how we will move forward with their request to even interview just a handful of the clients, which finally came at the end of last year.
So do you think that's why the president can say not even a smidgen? Because he knows it's going to get caught up in this quagmire of legalese and nothing will come of it.
Yeah, the focus for the administration is twofold. One, they want to, of course, not get to some kind of real criminal stage of this that could involve anybody. But two, get through the midterm elections. This is it for them. This is their last election cycle, and they want these new rules through. And if these new rules go through on 501c4s, this is effectively a moot issue to discuss because none of these groups will qualify for 501c4 status. So effectively, they have shut them down for an election cycle, 2010, some of 2010, certainly 2012, and they can shut them down for 2014. They've accomplished their goal. They've got new rules in that will prevent them from moving forward as C4s ever again. And so again, that's what I think is the problem, is that we are up against an administration who said it sounded wrong, acted like it was bad, but now is trying to institutionalize it with new rules.
It's just staggering. It's just staggering.
Yeah.
Where do we go with Benghazi?
Benghazi is another one. I mean, talking about the administration totally stonewalling members of Congress, but people do want to get the truth out. That's what we've seen in every one of these scandals, is that there are decent people inside the government who want the truth to be known, at least as much as they do know. That's really all we've gotten from Congress here. And the idea that people regret it, and, we hear that about the IRS, or it's not good that this happened, we apologize for that. That's not enough. And, the IRS scandal is bad because it involves viewpoint discrimination and really abuse of government data. And it's everything people freak out about when they think about the size of our bureaucracy going wrong. And it happened. But no one got killed. And that's the difference between, an IRS issue and Benghazi. And all of them are serious. But the fact is, these families still don't know why the men and women who wanted to go and try to save their loved ones and their family members weren't allowed to go and attempt to do that. Is it, the idea that, they blame a video, which, again, that's still coming out, that they still try to deny that this was terrorism. Even though all of these groups in their early emails, they were defining them as terror groups, they are still to this day don't want to say this is linked to a bigger terror effort. It's playing politics with definitions. It doesn't make sense to me either. I don't understand why this administration is so dead set on declaring, battles against terror over. Look at what's happening as we speak in Sochi. The discussion, so much of that during the Olympics has been focused on Islamic terror as well.
Well, again, doesn't this come back to the Speaker? Can he do more on this? Can he go for special prosecutor? Can he bring more people before the committee to testify? I mean, why can't we keep this out in the forefront?
So foreign policy is even more difficult for that. That's more difficult for Congress because the president does have a bit more control over what is top secret. The IRS info is not top secret. It's not. It doesn't involve any classified information. It doesn't involve CIA agents, and so because of that, it's different. And so much of what's happening around Benghazi, we're not seeing because it's being done behind closed doors. So that's problem one to trying to push forward with more. Number two is being able to talk to the witnesses. We've heard a lot about witness intimidation. But when we got rid of the independent counsel, and there were a lot of people on both sides of the aisle that thought that office had begun to be abused. But when that was done away with, and now we just have the special prosecutors that are appointed by the Attorney General, again, we'd be in the same situation with the IRS, but even maybe more heated and certainly easier for a special prosecutor to say, you know what, this is too classified, too much national security, kind of like the NSA issue, so we can't really move forward. I mean, it should be a real scandal. The families may have some action. Now, we don't represent them, so I don't know what they're thinking, but they could possibly file a civil lawsuit to try to get answers and information. But the administration's tried to handle it the same way, a bit more seriously than the IRS. But they've tried to say, it was a mistake. We didn't have enough security there. But like as Hillary Clinton said in her last bit of testimony before stepping down as Secretary of State, who cares? Who cares? They don't care why these people were attacked. They only care that, they should have had more security. And that's just not right.
So am I hearing you say, Jordan, that there is no possibility of action being taken? We can't prosecute anybody on these two cases.
There's civil actions, and here's another big thing that could change things. The midterm elections. If the Senate were to switch and go Republican, you could see some major changes in that. There could be much more pressure. That's why I don't like to say, well, it's not just John Boehner. It's very tough for just the one branch of the Congress to get these things done. Right. They really need both branches. And if both branches were Republican, and I'm not saying that people need to vote that way, but just to explain, if they were, then yes, you could see certain movement on this that we're not going to see without that.
And nothing can be done about Eric Holder. I mean, not even Fast and Furious stuck on him, so we can't do anything to slow him down.
He was held in contempt by the House, but again, the Senate, not controlled by Republicans. They didn't move forward. The investigation didn't move forward. So they literally did as much as they could do. And unlike past administrations, President Obama has kept Eric Holder very close, which, again, sends a message. He's very close to the president. He's in charge of the entire Department of Justice, which includes the FBI and all of the criminal investigations of government abuse, and he's in charge. So the president stuck by him, let him take a lot of heat, but the president hasn't even kind of given him the okay, time for you to move on. Eric Holder stayed, and that has sent a message to Washington. Very unprecedented, by the way, very unprecedented.
So politically, then, the smartest thing that they could do is keep both of these in House hearings.
Yep.
Through the primary cycle, at least through the primary cycle.
At least through the primary cycle, and then deal with what they've got to deal with after the fact. But some of this is they want to play down these scandals because of it's too much politics. I mean, that's the real problem, Perry, is that we keep having to tie it to politics, either because that's the only way we get to the truth, which is a sad state for the American legal system and justice system, that the only way we could possibly get to the truth is if, a partisan election takes place and that the Congress's power makeup changes. But I think that's the reality. And the same thing goes for, all the concerns. No one thinks for a minute that the Benghazi issue was not because of politics, that Fast and Furious was not because of Second Amendment issues and politics, and the same thing goes with the IRS. I mean, that was the most partisan politics on display. So you put all those things together and you realize sometimes, and we're I think, in one of those moments now in the country, the only way to get to the next step is by political change, and there are those opportunities coming sooner rather than later.
Well, Jordan, the best to you and your dad and your whole team. You guys are just wonderful. And I want to say to our viewers and listeners, go to ACLJ's website and support what they do. Any last thoughts now back to Pastor Abedini, what we can do? We're praying, but what can we do?
Sure. Keep praying. I mean, that's one. And two is to continue to share the stories, share the updates. Make sure, President Obama's statement was great. And I like to say now, in light of the conversation we've been having, that everybody can join with President Obama. It doesn't matter what political party now, or if you think you're a conservative or liberal, he has now spoken out. So I think we can all join with our commander-in-chief and the leader of the free world in calling for the release of Saeed, praying for him, which President Obama said he called on people to do. And so, just keep sharing the story along with your prayers so that this family can be united once again.
Thank you, my friend. Blessings to you. See you at the NRB, I guess. Will you be there?
Sounds good. Yeah, I will be. Thanks, Barry.
I'll look you up. Thanks, Jordan. See you. All right, we'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Daniel and I work at theDove TV. Compared to Portland, Seattle, and LA, Medford might be considered a small market, but at theDove, we're excited about the opportunity to make a big impact right here in our community. And you help make that happen. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us now by making a secure online donation at our website, thedove.us, or by phoning 541-776-5368.
Well, welcome back. Earlier, we had the chance to talk to Dennis Linthicum. He is a Republican candidate for Congress. He's currently a commissioner in Jackson County, and asked him why he's decided to run for Congress in light of a already sitting Republican in Congress. Let's join that conversation. Today I have the opportunity to interview one of the candidates that's running for Congress in the 2nd Congressional District in the state of Oregon. Delighted to have in the studio with us today Dennis Linthicum. He's a Klamath County Commissioner. You've been serving there, Dennis, for what, 3 years now?
I have been. I was elected in 2010. It's sort of an interesting story. I was teaching a Sunday school class at Bonanza Community Church, and it was real straightforward, simple biblical economics. And it wasn't, I was using some material from R.C. Sproul and from Gary North, and a gentleman in the classroom said, "You ought to run for county commissioner."
And you did.
Well, yeah, actually, I think first I told him to go jump in a lake or something. And so I've been in private industry all my life, and he had a passion for our founders' ideas, and he introduced me to some Republicans. I've been a Republican all my life, but he introduced me to the Republican Central Committee, and the more I got involved, I decided this is a good thing to do, and here I am.
Good for you. Well, what makes you decide to run for Congress?
Well, basically, the congressional arena is really an interesting, dunghill to step into, but my 3 years as a county commissioner has given me the impetus to go to the next level. As a county commissioner, you're running as a subdivision of state government. State governments today are very supine to the federal government, and because of that relationship, county commissioners have very little freedom in what they do. They are either following state jurisdiction, ORSs, OARs, etc., or they're following federal rules and regulations. And I decided that as a commissioner, somebody keeps throwing dirt in my face, and I decided I want to go to Washington and break their shovels.
Well, that's a nice way of putting it. Of all the issues, in Klamath County, you guys got a lot of issues over there. I mean, I'm well familiar with a lot of them. You got water issues, forest issues, just general economic issues. How would you rate those as importance as you run for Congress?
Well, they're all extremely important, and I think that's part of the problem at the federal level. The federal government has gorged itself on power and regulatory authority, and because they've gorged themselves in so many facets of our lives, the individual person on the street, the businessman, the farmer, the rancher, is losing liberty on a daily basis. And so what ends up happening is we end up thrashing at the branches instead of striking at the root. I think the root of the issue, you'll notice on my material and business card and on my website, I call myself a constitutional conservative. If we don't go back to the Constitution and bind the legislator with the chains of the Constitution, as Jefferson said, we've got a tough game in front of us, and that's what I would like to do. I'd like to keep talking about constitutional authority and keep driving the message home that the federal government does not have appropriate jurisdiction in these arenas, and yet they've assumed that authority.
Water's a big issue over there.
Yeah, water's a big issue.
And the feds want to get their hands on it.
That's right, that's right.
So what's your response?
Well, I think the federal government doesn't belong in our water issues, and to a certain extent they're not there. To a certain extent it is the Oregon Department of Water Resources that controls water rights and those kinds of things. But in terms of federal policy, they've either got water quantity, water quality. They've got air quality, PM 2.5 particulate matter problems with your wood stove in the wintertime. They don't mind when you burn down a forest and pollute the air like crazy in the summertime. They only mind when it's your wood stove trying to keep your house warm in the winter. And these are just inconsistencies. I think it's problematic to fight each of these little items, whether it's a spotted owl or spotted frog. We need to ask a question, does the EPA have this regulatory authority? And if not, why have we surrendered our lives to them?
You're running against a very long-term Republican who has fought many battles. Why do you think Congressman Walden needs to be replaced?
I think the problem that we're facing in America is the political class basically, after too many years in Washington, loses touch with reality. They lose touch with their constituents. They lose touch with the individuals that they're there to represent and serve. So I'm for term limits, and I think Greg Walden, after doing 16 years in Congress, has done a fine job, but it's time that he come home, because right now he's immune to the cries from the man on the street. He doesn't hear them as closely or as much as he hears the lobbyists and the special interests that are begging for various pieces of the federal purse.
So would you term limit yourself?
Oh, absolutely.
How many terms?
I think probably 4 years is too short. You know, in a congressman serves for 2 years at a time. Right. I would say 2 terms typically, but for a congressman, maybe it should be 4 terms, which would be 8 years. I think for a senator, 2 terms at 6 years is, quite frankly, a long time. 12 years is a long time in office. The president is limited to 2 terms. I think our founders had it straight when they said a congressional individual in the House should be limited to 2 years, because that means, as they're controlling finances and are tied to the money bags, if you will, of the federal government, that they actually have to come home faster than the other guys.
How do you see the farmers, the fishermen, the power companies, the miners, and the Indians all getting along?
Here's what I think they could get along better if government regulation wasn't involved, because right now what you have is the federal government engineering what they think are good policies, and what that creates is unintended consequences in all the other areas. So if you allowed, through business relationships and economies, if you allowed miners and farmers and ranchers, cattle ranchers, and the tribes and the foresters and the business people within your urban and metropolitan areas, if you allowed their free ingenuity, you would see an entirely different marketplace. Right now, the central government in Washington is trying to arrange chess pieces on the board, but unlike chess, where this piece can only move in those certain directions, people have the freedom to choose any path they want to. And I think that's part of the issue. Part of what I'm fighting for is freedom for the individual.
What about forest management? What would you do there?
I would strongly urge, as a congressman in particular, I would strongly urge the federal government to dispose of all the federal lands within the various state boundaries. Right now, the EPA, or the Forest Service, sets a policy, and it extends from the West Coast to the East Coast. And if it's a bad policy, it impacts the entire United States. I would suggest 50 different state policies would be better. You would find that sweet spot between what's efficient, what's economically sustainable, what does the environment look like for future generations, etc. And you would get all of those policy perspectives that you don't see today.
As a commissioner, what have you done in working with some kind of reasonable solution to the tribes controlling the water and the farmers getting the water?
As the county commissioner, before I came to office, the Board of Commissioners voted to support the KBRA and KHSA, which is the dam removal agreements. And I was a stout non-supporter of the KBRA, because I think the KBRA destroys 168 megawatts of electrical generation capacity in the hydro arena, as well as flood control and water management things. Most of that water is not used for irrigation purposes, but most of the water in Klamath Lake is used for irrigation. And what we have is a biological opinion that that focuses entirely on keeping lake levels high for the short-nosed sucker and allowing stream flow for the Chinook. And these two policies are at odds with each other, and because they're at odds, agriculture gets the short end of the stick.
So where is that going, by the way, Dennis? If the commissioners before you took office have agreed for those dams to come out, where is that in the process now?
Our board voted to actually remove ourselves from being signatories on that agreement. And so we made that motion to no longer abide by any of the terms of the KBRA. The key items that were problematic with the KBRA is it doesn't focus on reservoir construction or saving water. If you think about it, if global warming is true and the snowpack will be less and rainfall will be greater in future years, we should be building reservoirs like madmen to save that water resource, because if we don't save it, it will spill into the Pacific and become salty water instead.
Last question, and we'll wrap it. Do you see the Republican Party pretty much together, or do you see it as fragmented? What's your take on the Republican Party these days?
I think the Republican Party has problems because they're not willing to follow the Constitution. If the Republican Party would follow adherence to the Constitution and constitutional limits and barriers to government action, then you would instill in a free people those liberties and those inalienable rights that were granted from God Himself. And these are things that government can't take away and should be enforcing at every step. So I think the Republican Party needs a serious conversation about where to go next, and I hope it's towards constitutional and liberty-loving government.
All right, if you want to get a hold of Dennis and his campaign, it's dennis2014.com. There's a picture of the website on the screen there, dennis2014.com. Well, best to you.
Thank you.
Okay, and stay in touch.
Okay.
All right, coming up next, conversations about dying and living well until it happens. And maybe there's someone in your family that is suffering with dementia or Alzheimer's. We're going to talk about that next here on Focus Today.
Hi, I'm Paula, and I work at theDove TV. Every day we get letters and emails from people who've been encouraged, blessed, and challenged by the programs on theDove TV. But we couldn't do it without you. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us continue to bring inspiration and hope to our community by making a secure online donation at our website, thedove.us, or call us at 541-776-5368.
Okay, welcome back. And my guest today is Dr. Patrick Gillette, and he's going to be one of the featured speakers on a series now of conversations about dying and living well until it happens. And this is going to occur, it's free of charge, and it's going to happen over the next 8 Thursdays at the Smullen Center here in Medford. And you're welcome to join him either at 2 o'clock in the afternoon or 7 o'clock in the evening, however your schedule works out. And he's going to be the first speaker talking about Alzheimer's. Dr. Gillette, nice to have you with us.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here, Perry.
All right, Alzheimer's. Senility, dementia, Alzheimer's. Is there a difference?
Well, it's like, what's the difference between chicken noodle soup and soup?
Okay. Well.
Alzheimer's disease is the most common form of dementia.
Okay.
So people are afraid of the word Alzheimer's disease, but they aren't so afraid of dementia. But if you have dementia, there's about a 2/3 chance you have Alzheimer's disease.
All right. Now, you've been dealing with this for a long time, haven't you?
Yes.
Quite a few years. And your lecture is about an hour or so long. And what do you want people to get from this? To understand what the disease is and how to care for it?
How to care for it, how to deal with the process of it, how to plan ahead, because it is a terminal illness. They may not die from Alzheimer's disease, but Alzheimer's disease, when it's in the mix, certainly is something to consider. It also makes it's more difficult to make decisions when you have Alzheimer's disease, so you need to make any decisions you can early on.
Early on.
In fact, before you have Alzheimer's disease.
Okay, right. And that's basically what this whole series is about. Get your life in order, and I think that's a stewardship issue, quite frankly. All right, so one of the most difficult parts of managing this disease is the person who has to help or care for those who have it.
Yes.
And I don't know, you probably got all the stories, but what's your advice there?
My advice is get help. Make sure you have time off where you can go fishing if you want to, or
Right.
go see a movie. That's a huge impact. Also, learn how to deal with it, and deal with it in a non-confrontational way. One of the phrases that I pass on to caregivers a lot is "not today." When the person with Alzheimer's asks the same question, you know, when can I move back home, or when can I drive? If you say no, then that's sort of slam the door shut in their face, and they're going to get angry and deal with it however they can. But if you say not today, it's like, oh, okay, well, I'll bring it up again tomorrow. And tomorrow might be 5 minutes from now, but not today. It's a very simple phrase.
How do you care for somebody you love who suffers with this when you want to communicate sensibly with them and you just can't?
Well, a friend of mine, Tom Sanford, who deals with teenagers, came up with this phrase that I use a lot, and that is, if logic doesn't work, don't use it.
Okay.
And that's why you never lie to somebody, even
Right.
with Alzheimer's disease. Never lie to them, because they're going to know it.
Mm-hmm.
Just change the subject, give a passive statement like the "not today," or maybe we can do that a little later. Just put it off. If they come up with the same story that they've had, express some interest in it and say, well, what about this, and try and get them to change directions. You can learn something else about them.
There you go. What's happening to them physically when this starts?
Well, it starts long before it shows up. And it starts by neurons losing their ability to communicate with each other. And eventually the neurons die off in the brain, and they're not able to remember. And it's spotty. It's like Swiss cheese. It hits here and there, and it hits different in different people. So it starts long before anybody knows it, because your body can adapt up to a certain point. And then once it reaches that point, it becomes evident. And sometimes it's the ones closest to them that have the hardest time accepting it, because they've adapted as well. The spouse will adapt to these changes, and it's no problem until something happens to the spouse. They end up in the hospital. They end up...
Is the brain not only losing its memory, is it also affecting body functions? Is that shutting down too?
No, it doesn't. That will happen secondarily, but it happens more in the areas where memory is.
Or memory is?
Yes.
Okay. Speech?
Speech will affect speech.
Okay. Now, there's been suggestions. Well, you change things. You stimulate them in another direction. Maybe you teach them how to run a computer, or you rearrange the furniture in the room. Does that work?
Sometimes it does. Sometimes that causes more confusion. Some of the things I try and institute early on, it's interesting because music seems to be in a different part of the brain, and so people can remember their hymns and sing all the words to all the hymns, but they can't remember the name of their wife.
Really?
Yeah. And that's an individual thing. So you try different things. One thing I like to have people do is, in prevention of it, and also early on, is try and memorize. And Proverbs are great to memorize because they're short and simple, and they're pithy sayings, and they're kind of fun. But reading out loud is another thing. And Hardy Boy's mystery stories that we read as kids are great because they're written at about an 8th grade level, and they're short chapters, and they can read the same chapter every day.
Wow.
But have them read it out loud, and that helps maintain speech as well.
Is medication used to treat this?
There are medications that are used to treat the symptoms of it, and they help. As the brain continues to decline, we try and enhance what's left. And the medications, there are 5 medications that are approved, and sometimes they're almost miraculous how well they work. That's very, very rare, but I've seen it happen. Otherwise, it helps maintain function. We always focus on Alzheimer's disease of just being memory, but it's also activities of daily living and behavior. Depression is very common with Alzheimer's disease. They can't dress themselves anymore. They have trouble bathing themselves, and that's as the burden falls more and more on the caregiver.
What about social interaction? Does that help or hurt?
Social interaction is a great prevention, and it also helps as long as the people that they're socially interacting with understand something about the disease. And if family reunions are really hard on Alzheimer's patients, because they, their grandson comes up and says, "Hey, remember me, Grandpa? I'm your favorite grandson." He has no idea who's looking at him, and so you go up and say, "Hi, I'm Pat, your favorite grandson." And you just do simple things like you give them the answer so that they don't have to stop and think about it.
Sometimes this is very devastating to families, especially when they can't remember their spouse's name or they don't remember the child's name, and you've seen it. At what point is it okay not to have them in your home and not care for them on a daily basis?
I think the point, that's a great question. The point, and it's an individual choice, but when you can no longer be the spouse because you're too busy being a caregiver, you need to let somebody else be the caregiver. And the spouse feels responsible and they want to make sure that they're being well cared for. Well, if they continue, they're not going to be able to care for them.
But the change of the one who is suffering with the disease to another home, facility, or whatever, is that, some people are under a lot of guilt. That's cruel, I don't want to do that. But at the same time, that might be just the right thing to do.
Yes. And it's better for the spouse to oversee the care of another caregiver than the spouse not being able to because they're too ill or they die from taking care of them.
All right. What can you say to children who don't understand what's happening to grandma or grandpa?
It's hard because if they live locally, they'll be a little more aware of it. But if they're just visiting every once in a while, when they come in and visit, a person with Alzheimer's will rise to the occasion and sparkle for a day or two, and we don't understand how that works, but it happens a lot.
Is there a timeline here from the time you're literally diagnosed to where
it's anywhere? The numbers are 2 to 20 years.
2 to 20.
Roughly. I've seen people with it longer than that. I've seen people with it, once diagnosis, not last very long at all.
And it's not necessarily restricted to the elderly, is it?
No, it's about 6 to 10% are below age 65. As you get up to age 85, it approaches 45% of people. If you hit 100, it doesn't seem to occur as frequently if you're over 100.
Now, for those of us who are moving on,
yes,
what do we do to prevent it?
I usually recommend 4 things. One is a healthy lifestyle, which would include diet, a healthy diet high in antioxidants, not in pills form, but in healthy food, exercise, physical exercise, mental exercise, which is important, just playing crossword puzzles. You don't have to get them right. I hate crossword puzzles, but you don't have to get them right, just do them. Learning a new language. A friend of mine down at UCLA advocates if you're right-handed, 1 day a week you should just write with your left hand.
Wow.
Because it uses the other side of your brain a little bit. And also social interaction. Going to church is good for you.
Yeah, right. Yes, we know that in many, many ways. That's wonderful. All right, so coming up Thursday will be the first of Conversations About Dying and Living Well Until It Happens.
And it's the same talk at 2 o'clock and at 7 o'clock.
Yeah, it's the same one. They're going to have 2 sessions. You can go to the 2 o'clock one or the 7 o'clock one there at the Smullen Center. And quickly, just highlight what you're going to cover.
Well, I sort of a journey through Alzheimer's disease. The mind gets tangled and how it kind of works. I have a theory called the cocoon theory that we'll talk about. It's kind of an interesting approach to it.
All right. They're at the Smullen Center, and Dr. Gillette will be the first speaker, so don't miss it. I think you'll find this to be very helpful and very resourceful. Again, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and then a repeat of the same seminar at 7 o'clock in the evening coming up this Thursday at the Smullen Center. Thank you, Dr. Gillette.
Thank you.
All right, we'll see you next time.
Hi, I'm Jim and I work at theDove TV. Every weekday between 6 and 8 a.m., our award-winning news and sports team bring you the best morning show around. It's live, it's honest, and it's a whole lot of fun. And you help make it happen. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us continue to air local programs that share your voice by making a secure online donation at our website, thedove.us.